Hi friends, welcome back. We are going to keep reading The Outcasts of 19 Schuyler Place by E.L. Coningsburg. Remember, I don't own the copyright to this book. I'm just reading it out loud for educational purposes. Okay, so the last time that we read, Jake and Margaret were kind of sitting, admiring the towers, and Jake said that he would come to town to visit every Wednesday on his day off to paint a rose on a ceiling in Margaret's bedroom for her. So we're going to pick back up at chapter 10. We ate in the kitchen. For as long as I could remember, the uncles had never dined in their dining room, so the four of us crowded around an old enamel-top table. We sat on wooden folding chairs that had not been manufactured since the invention of plastic. The slats were scratched, and their color had mellowed beyond yellow to mustard. But there was a linen cloth on the table. The napkins were linen too. The dishes were china, the glasses crystal, and the silverware was sterling. The food was served family-style, from antique tureens and platters, and presented with panache that would have been the pride of any four-star restaurant in Epiphany, if Epiphany had had a four-star restaurant. Jake could hardly wait to find out more about the towers. He started by asking when they got started. Morris was pleased that he had asked when and not why. There was no why. It was a long time ago, he said. I started shortly after we bought the house. It was a glass house, Uncle Alex added. A glass house made of wood? Jake asked. A glass house because it was built by the Tappan Glass Works. Uncle Morris said, I didn't hear this man ask you who built the house. I thought I heard him ask when did we start the towers. Looking sheepish, Uncle Alex answered, He did. He asked when. Can I continue? You can and you may. So, if I may, Uncle Morris said, casting fish eyes at his brother, I started shortly after we moved into the house. Wilma, my wife, had died. I wanted to do something. I didn't even know what. I just knew it was not going to be small, like a watch, or exact, like a clock. So one day I started. What I was building, I wasn't sure. An idea I had, but not a plan. So even before I decided what it was I was doing, I found out. I was building towers. They became as they grew. The glass house. Like every other house in the neighborhood, the house at 19 Schuyler Place had been built and owned by the Tappan Glass Works. The company rented them to its workers until the factory was moved to the other side of the lake. Then the houses were sold. Like the uncles, most of the people who bought them were immigrants to whom owning a home meant owning a piece of America. Every house was tall and narrow and faced the street straight on. Every house had a front porch with 4 steps leading up to it, a mailbox nailed to the wall by the front door, and a metal box that sat on the floor of the porch near the steps. Milkmen delivered milk in glass bottles into the metal boxes, and mailmen carried heavy leather pouches that they lightened, one letter at a time, as they walked up and then down of each flight of front porch steps. The neighbors helped each other out in the small ways that neighbors can and the ways that friendly ones do. They held keys to each other's houses and borrowed cups of sugar and shared cookies, casseroles, and the produce from their gardens. They called each other Mr. and Mrs. Mr. and Mrs. Bevilacqua lived at 17 Schuyler Place, and Mr. and Mrs. Vanderwall lived at number 21. Alex said, We had once a jewelry store downtown, 1 block away from the town square. We called it the store Jewels by Rose. We loved the name. By was a play on English words. B-I, by, means to, and is also a homonym for by, B-U-Y, and for by, B-Y. Morris pointed his chin in his brother's direction. That one took care of the crystal and china. We had a bridal registry. I took care of the fine jewelry and watches. Alex added, Business at Jewels by Rose was very personal. Half the diamond engagement rings and place settings of china sold in Epiphany came from Jewels by Rose. That's the way it was before the days of discount stores and universal credit cards. Things were personal. If a customer wasn't satisfied with something, he complained to us, not to his lawyer. People who were our friends and neighbors were also our customers. Back then, when we had our store, one person could be all 3, a friend, a neighbor, and a customer. Downtown was booming, Uncle Morris said. Business at Jewels by Rose was very good. Very good. Morris kept a watch repair shop in the back of Jewels by Rose. People from all over Clarion County came to him to get their watches repaired. And then there were the clocks. I repaired the big clocks, Morris explained. The ones that were on the sides of buildings or in steeples or on top of columns and street corners. I've been to towns in Maine and Tennessee, and once I went to Des Moines, Iowa to fix a clock in a bank tower. Nowadays, banks aren't built to look like banks. They are built to look like bungalows with drive-through carports. Nobody puts a clock on a bungalow. Alex added, My brother can repair chimes, a lost art. He studied Jake for a minute. It's probably hard for a young man like yourself to believe that people once relied on the face of a public clock to tell them the time of day. And before clocks, there were mill whistles and church chimes. Time was measured in sections, mornings, afternoons, and nights. It wasn't too many years ago that measuring time by the quarter hour was accurate enough for most things, and the minute hand was good for boiling eggs. The second hand was invented as a form of persecution, Morris said. Jacob laughed. What do you have to say about nanoseconds? Useless. You can't even say nanosecond in a nanosecond. Can a horse win a race by a nose in a nanosecond? Jake shook his head. In a nanosecond, can I even tell our little Margaret Rose that we are glad she is back here with us? He reached over and patted my hand. How did you find the time to do the towers? Jake asked. By not being in a hurry, Alex said. That's how you find the time. Uncle Morris pushed his chair back from the table and got up. He went to the kitchen counter to start the coffee. He ground the beans and set them into a filter and poured boiling water over them. Like the ancient Japanese tea ceremony, no part of the ritual was to be rushed. As we waited, I got up from the table to clear the dinner dishes. Jake got up too. My job, I said. You must sit still while they do the coffee and dessert, or my uncles will think you're in a hurry. My uncles do not believe in hurrying any part of dinner. As he was setting out the cups and saucers, Uncle Morris said, Alex, my brother, he never asked me what I was doing, never a question. What he was doing, what I was doing, we never discussed. Even when we dug the foundation for the first tower, Alex said, even after we sank the first pilings, we never discussed it. During World War II, we couldn't build much because the country needed all the scrap metal for the war effort. Then one day, Alex started making pendants. The first ones were from the broken china and crystal we had in our store. As it was with the towers, so it was with the pendants also. My brother pointed to a spot. I knew what to do. Without discussion, I knew what he wanted. I drilled a hole and we hung a pendant. Alex said, no rehearsals. After he used up the broken pieces we had from the shop, he started buying glass and bottles from flea markets. Noxzema used to come in a pretty blue glass jar, Alex said. Also, Philip's milk of magnesia. They use blue plastic now. But most of the cobalt blue glass you see there is from those old jars. I like to mix the colors, and also to mix glass and porcelain and the metal parts from Morris's old clocks. I saved all the old parts, Morris said. Worn out gears I saved, and balance wheels. Sometimes there were chimes. There is a part inside a clock that is called an escape wheel. It is round and has saw teeth. I loved when Morris had one of those. Those I made into a feature attraction. And you didn't love when I brought home a balance spring? Of course I love the balance springs. He turned to Jake and pleaded. Did you hear me say I didn't love the balance springs? Jake didn't know if he was to answer or not. Instead, he said, the mix is good. I like it a lot. Morris grunted. The balance wheels he bound with wire, and these he hung on the towers like earrings. Alex nodded. Yes, like earrings. Did you hang them so some of them would strike one another like wind chimes? Alex got a faraway look in his eyes. They sing, you know. When the wind blows, the towers sing. The wind decides the pitch. When it blows strong, the heavy ones sing bass and compete with the crystal, which is a soprano. He smiled to himself. Was that deliberate or a happy accident? Jake asked. Alex shrugged his old world shrug. The answer is yes and no. It just happened. It was worked out. It was an accident. It was planned. Maybe an accident led to a plan. Maybe the accident was part of a greater plan. Who knows? Uncle Morris said, the Noxzema looks pretty, but it makes a clunky sound. To the Noxzema and the milk of magnesia, you shouldn't listen. Downtown was booming. After the war, the veterans returned and college enrollment swelled, and so did the population. Margaret Rose Landau gave birth to my mother, Naomi. Mrs. Bevilacqua gave birth to Loretta, and Mrs. Vanderwall had Peter. Returning World War II veterans were getting married, and Jules by Rose was selling a lot of engagement rings and bridal shower gifts, and strings of pearls for the groom to give the bride, and watches for the bride to give the groom. After the war, Morris started again making trips to repair town clocks. Those were the years when we could count on our sister Margaret to help out in the store. Our sister couldn't repair watches. Only Morris can do that. But Margaret knew quality, and she always knew how to be nice to customers. We could always count on her. Morris said, when our sister was living, we didn't need any Helgas or tattooed boys. I said, there was a girl in my cabin at camp who had a tattoo. Uncle Morris was shocked. A girl your age? I nodded. A real tattoo? I nodded. Looking pained, Uncle Morris said to Jake, until these last few years, I didn't even know that anyone with a tattoo except for survivors from the concentration camps. And I can tell you, those tattoos were not a decoration. They were numbers. Numbers for the purposes of identification. The Nazis turned people into numbers. He shook his head sadly. But today these kids decorate their arms and who knows what else. He looked over at me. Her tush, I said. Ashley Schwartz has a tattoo on her tush. Uncle Alex grinned. A tattoo of what? He asked. A rose, Jake answered. You've seen it? I asked, shocked. Jake smiled. Of course I've seen it. Every time she puts on her bikini. If she didn't want people to see it, she would have had it below the bikini line. Uncle Morris was still shaking his head. Jake cleared his throat and changed the subject. Where did the clock faces come from? Uncle Alex explained. They were rescued from the big clocks that were being demolished for urban renewal. When we got into the 1970s, urban renewal became the big thing. There had been riots in the big inner cities and the government was trying to clean them up. What they did was demolish whole blocks of old buildings. Marble came down, bricks fell, everything old came down. High-rise glass buildings went up, and parking garages. Parking garages so that people would have a place for their cars when they drive to their offices from the suburbs. They don't stay downtown any longer than they have to. They do their business and then get back in their cars and go back to the suburbs. Morris added, they don't put big fancy clocks on high-rise glass. I took all the clocks that no one wanted. The faces we put on top of the towers. They came from all over. Different clocks all over. None of them match. Alex laughed. They don't match, but then they don't tell time either. Jake said, the way they're set, there's no way you can see two of them at once. Uncle Alex said, not a lot of people figure that out. Now it was his turn to get up and announce, dessert will be Margaret's favorite. We watched as he whipped cream with a wire whisk and set the bowl in the refrigerator. He removed a roll of chestnut pate from the refrigerator, dipped a knife into warm water before cutting 4 slices from it, carefully placed each slice into a stemmed glass, replaced the rest of the pate in the refrigerator, took a container of vanilla ice cream from the freezer, and slowly dished a double scoop into the glasses, drizzled chocolate sauce over the ice cream, and followed that with a huge dollop of whipped cream. Before he set my portion in front of me, he struck the side of the glass with a spoon to make it ring. Then he lifted the glass and held it high and said, welcome home, Edith Margaret come. Who is Edith Margaret come? Jake asked. I am. She's my sweet Margaret, Uncle Alex said. Mine too, Uncle Morris said. Jake looked at me and said, I wasn't so sure about that 24 hours ago, but I am now. My favorite dessert deserved to be eaten slowly. The best way to slow down is to lick your spoon clean each time and to carefully apportion the whipped cream, the ice cream, and the chestnut pate carefully so that all 3 flavors finish together. Spoon licking and apportioning make you savor each mouthful. Uncle Morris poured the coffee. Jake took a sip and said, I could swoon. The only thing that would make this the tiniest bit better would be if you don't mind me smoking a cigar. Go right ahead. Jake reached into the bib pocket of his coveralls and took out 2 fresh cigars. Will you join me? Uncle Morris did. Uncle Alex did not. After 2 very long puffs, Jake asked, why did you paint them? Was that to protect them? Uncle Alex shrugged his old world shrug. They were not rusting. They are stainless steel, and the wires are copper. Maybe you just needed to take things to the next level, Jake suggested. I don't know from levels, Uncle Morris said. What my brother needed was exaggeration. Maybe it was time for rock and roll, Jake said. Uncle Alex smiled. Maybe, he said. Maybe that's the way to put it. But it was also true that business was slowing down and down. There was more time, much more time, Uncle added. The first time we ran out of paint, we tried to make a match, but we couldn't. The new paint never matched the old. We could never judge how much we needed, and we were always running out of one color or another. So when we ran out of the original color, we would just mix something new. By the time summer was over, the sun would fade the brightest shades, so the colors never blended altogether. Very interesting, Jake said. That accounts for the camouflage pattern. You don't like it? Uncle Morris asked. Oh, I do. I do like it. I like it a lot. I didn't mean to say I don't like it. People don't say interesting when they really like something, Morris said. Interesting is what people say when they don't like something, but don't want to say that they don't. I was trying to say that how it happened was interesting. I said to Jake, do you want me to tell you how it happened last spring? He nodded. Last spring, my uncles let me mix up a batch of paint. So I added some of this and some of that and ended up with a pale orange color that looked like peach in dim light and apricot when the light was bright. There was no color like it anywhere on the towers. It was extraordinary, Uncle Alex said. Like an orange sherbet. Uncle Morris added. It was unique, not interesting. It was decorative. Very nice. Very nice. There was some paint left over, so we used Margaret Cum's orange sherbet for maintenance all of last summer, Uncle Alex said. This year I was supposed to make lemon and lime to go with it, I said, but I got sent off to camp. It occurred to me just then that I would be able to help paint while I was there. I can mix up the lemon and lime now, I said. We'll have our fruit cocktail after all. We'll see, Margaret Cum, Uncle Alex said, but he did not look at me when he said it. It's very artistic already. Leave it, Morris said severely to his brother. Then, softening his tone, he said to me, it's very artistic even without the lemon and lime, Edith Margaret Cum. Very artistic. Business was slowing down and down. In 1965, the 5 Mile Creek Mall, a vast regional mall, heated in winter and air-conditioned in summer, opened. It was located near the county line, far from downtown, but it had parking spaces for 1,000 cars. Osmond's department store moved out of downtown and into the mall. Hallie's Hardware became part of the Ace Hardware chain and moved into a strip mall on the State Road. The drugstore became a Walgreens and followed the exodus. The Tivoli, an old-fashioned movie theater with chandeliers and a stage and a balcony, tried to hold on by becoming a second-run dollar movie house, but it had to close. After office hours, the streets of downtown were deserted. People couldn't wait to move out of the neighborhood. The Vanderwalls left, and so did the Bevilacquas. Those who could not sell their houses rented them, most often to students from Clarion College who were grateful for the cheap rent. Jake asked, "What happened to Jules by Rose?" "We lost it," Uncle Morris said abruptly. Alex explained. "Shoppers had all moved to the suburbs. They had to come to us by car. Parking was tight. People couldn't be sure they would have a place for their car like that at the mall. Jules by Rose was not doing enough business to pay the rent. We held out until 1970, the year our sister died. And then we closed. When Clarion State College became Clarion State University, the school built more dormitories, as well as apartments for married students, even a daycare center for students with children. Soon, the houses around Schuyler Place went empty. They had received more high spirits than high maintenance from the college crowd, so by the time they went on the rental market again, they were in bad shape. The neighborhood went from unkempt to undesirable. During the day, the streets were empty of people and filled with litter. The Bevilacqua's house was the first to be boarded up. At night, vagrants lifted the boards from the windows and took shelter in the empty rooms. Morris and Alex took down the mailbox and had a slot cut into their front door. If a package was to be delivered, the mailman left a yellow notification card, and Morris went to the post office to pick it up. No one came into the neighborhood unless they had to. "But you stayed here," Jake said. "I know the towers must have—" Uncle Morris interrupted. "The truth? After we paid off our debts, we couldn't afford to move. After we closed the store, we set up a little business here at the house. We used the dining room. Morris had his watch repair shop near the front window. I did a little business in antique china, glass, and silver. All my merchandise fit into one display case. I also did special orders for people who couldn't find a particular pattern. We put a little Jules by Rose sign out front." "A mistake," Morris added. "It was not an advertisement. It was an invitation. We were robbed 3 times. No, 4. That's 4 times within a year and a half, every 6 months. Like clockwork," Uncle Alex finished, and the brothers looked at each other and started to laugh. Jake looked puzzled at first, but then he too started to laugh. Still laughing, Uncle Alex said, "We got to be professional victims. The first time we were robbed, people lost their heirloom watches that they had brought in for repair. After that, we hid the good stuff and kept the safe full of junk. Some money, just so they could get away with ready cash, but mostly junk." Alex wiped tears from his eyes and asked his brother, "Do you remember the time the croc dropped the Dom crystal bowl?" "Remember? Of course I remember." Morris looked at Jake and said, "It was a beautiful piece. Amber glass, an antique. I asked the crook to save us the pieces, so he picked them up and cut his hand. He got furious. He hit me on the head, knocked me out." Uncle Alex continued. "After that, we kept handcuffs and socks and tape handy. We found that if we were tied up, the crooks felt safe and wouldn't beat us up. We didn't want them getting nervous. A nervous crook is a dangerous crook. The clean socks were so they wouldn't gag us with a filthy rag. We got so we could tell the combination to the safe with a gag in our mouths." The brothers looked at each other and broke out laughing again. Jake asked, "Did they ever catch any of the thieves?" "Yeah, those kids who broke the Dom crystal bowl, they left bloody fingerprints and they had a record." "What happened to them?" Alex answered, "They got a few months in jail, but we didn't get any of our merchandise back. Then while Morris and I were at the courthouse testifying," he started to giggle, and Uncle Morris caught it. As soon as one of them slowed down, the other lobbed it right back. Jake and I watched as if at a tennis match, and soon we were laughing too, even though we did not know why we were, except that we couldn't not. Finally, between gasps, Uncle Alex said, "While we were at the courthouse testifying, we were robbed again." And Uncle Morris caught his breath long enough to add, "Why should they miss an opportunity like that?" Uncle Alex said, "The police let us collect the pieces after they were finished with them. I'll show you the Dom crystal pendants if you like." He smiled and added, "They are the only parts of the towers that are recorded history." Morris said, "This is the strangest thing. Even after the neighborhood got dangerous and we were being robbed on a regular basis, no one hurt the towers. Isn't that funny?" "I would call it a tribute," Jake said. "Even Leonardo da Vinci didn't escape vandalism. His model of the horse for the Duke of Milan was used for target practice by the French soldiers who conquered Milan." Jake looked out the kitchen window. It was too dark for him to see anything, but he said anyway, "This looks like a nice neighborhood now. I noticed the houses on either side of you are freshly painted. The yards look nice and so do the sidewalks. Everything looks to be in good repair." "Not repaired," Morris corrected. "Don't say repaired. Say restored." He put his forefinger to his lips. "And don't call it urban renewal. Our town fathers made that perfectly clear. Urban renewal would mean they would tear down all the old, rundown buildings and put new ones, bigger and higher. Now they say they are preserving the past. They call it redevelopment. Uncle Alex explained. Our neighborhood has been officially designated as historical and charming. Uncle Morris said, I spit on charming. Uncle Alex said, the Rose brothers used to live in a neighborhood. Now we live in Old Town. They call it redevelopment. After the neighborhood around Schuyler Place went from bad to blighted, the city leaders created the Historic Downtown Trust Fund. This was a large sum of government money put aside to loan to people who wanted to buy any of the derelict downtown buildings and restore them. The uncle's neighborhood qualified. The city bought the old Osmond's department store building and converted it into a government office. They closed off Summit Street downtown and made it into a pedestrian mall. Being close to City Hall and the county offices, Old Town was a good place for young professionals, especially lawyers, to set up offices. The houses were cheap, and using the trust fund money, they got low-interest loans to convert them into offices, with all the necessities of modern electrical wiring and plumbing. All they had to do was agree to obey the regulations about preserving the historical integrity of Old Town. They could restore but not change the front of the houses, and they were to use approved colors when they painted. As part of the restoration project, trust fund money was also used to pave the alleys and strip them for parking. We got a small business loan from the bank and opened the Time Zone, a kiosk on the ground floor of the 5 Mile Creek Mall. Morris said, most modern watches and clocks need batteries, not a repairman. Nothing ticks anymore. People don't like ticking. Humming is acceptable, but no tick-tock. People love digital. With digital, kids don't even have to learn how to tell time. He made a face. I spit on digital. Alex explained. We sell watch bands and batteries and what are called fun watches to pay the rent, and occhiali and testoli. Oh yes, must not forget the sunglasses, Uncle Morris said. Even the ends of his mustache turned down. Here in Old Town, in the pedestrian mall where Jules by Rose used to be, the stores that once sold goods and services now sell tchotchkes and $3 cups of coffee with as many varieties as Heinz has ketchup. Uncle Alex said, Heinz has only one variety of ketchup. It has 57. Every bottle of ketchup says Heinz 57 varieties. That's what it is, 57 varieties. And isn't Heinz ketchup? Of course Heinz is ketchup. All the world knows that Heinz means ketchup. And so does it also mean 57 varieties? Of course, it's their trademark, but either you have Heinz ketchup or you have 56 other Heinz varieties. If that's what you insist, I insist. May I continue? Uncle Morris asked. Uncle Alex nodded and muttered, one ketchup, only one. Uncle Morris glared at him and said, I'm continuing, with your permission. Uncle Alex glared back before Uncle Morris continued. Where Jules by Rose was is now teas for $2. Buy one, get the second one for $2 more. They are selling t-shirts that say things that even the ACLU would want to flush down the toilet. Jake looked at me and laughed. I've had experience with t-shirts that have been flushed down the toilet, or shower. Uncle Morris said, you can get 57 varieties, with a sideways glance at Alex, of cappuccino, he paused for emphasis, or patchouli and every other form of incense and nonsense, but there is not a single place to buy a box of detergent or a roll of toilet paper in the new old downtown. Officially charming. Hapgood & Martin, the oldest and most prestigious law firm in Epiphany, converted 21 Schuyler Place into offices for their young associates. The city was proud to have them. After they moved in, the business section of the Epiphany Times ran a banner headline that said, Law firm stakes its future on the past. The article featured a 4-column wide, 4-inch long picture showing Taylor Hapgood holding a piece of paper. The caption under the picture explained that he was holding the original deed to the Vanderwall house. The article quoted Taylor Hapgood, the senior partner in the firm, as saying he had invested more money in fiber optic wiring than the original cost of the house had been when the Vanderwalls had purchased it from the Tappan Glass Works. Jeffrey and Gwendolyn Klinger, both lawyers, moved into 17 Schuyler Place, the house where the Bevilacqua once lived. But your property is valuable again, Jake said. Morris and Alex exchanged a look, and Jake asked, Isn't it? Yeah, sure, Uncle Morris said. Valuable. Uncle Alex massaged his neck and leaned his head back. He closed his eyes and said, We have lawyers on our right and lawyers on our left, and if lawyers know anything, they know property values. He charged forward, opened his eyes and grimaced, and how to protect them. And that is the end of chapter 10, so that is where we are going to stop for today. So kind of a little menacing ending. They're talking about how town has changed, and the uncles have kind of stayed the same, right? Their house, the towers, everything has stayed the same while everything around them has kept changing. So make sure you come back tomorrow and we will see what happens next. If the uncles have to change or if they can keep staying the same. All right, bye guys.